Let me take you back to Japan in 1995. An economic slump has sent the anime industry into a crisis. Fresh ideas are at a premium, and animation studios are beginning to close up shop. But with its last breath, Studio Gainax decides not to go out without a fight. Bringing one Hideaki Anno on board, they give the man full authorial reign over his own 26-episode TV show, Gainax's last-ditch effort to pull themselves out of bankruptcy. Little do they know that something incredible is about to happen. A show that would not only rescue Studio Gainax from the grave, but single-handedly usher in the revitalization of their entire industry. A series that would pave the way and set the standard for anime for decades to come. And that show was Neon Genesis Evangelion. When Shinji Ikari is summoned to the clandestine Nerve headquarters by his estranged father Gendo, he becomes entangled in mankind's fight against the horrific angels, creatures whose previous appearances have brought humanity to its knees. Their last hope comes in the form of Evangelion, a giant robotic weapon which Shinji is forced to pilot in order to thwart the angels. Scared, alone, and bearing the burden of responsibility, Shinji and his allies Rei and Asuka must confront themselves if they are to have any hope of safeguarding mankind's last line in the sand.
I'll do it! I'll pilot it!
First of all, I should mention that I never grew up with this show. I was 23 years late to this hype train, so when I tell you that Evangelion's story is one of a kind, I'm not telling you this through rose-tinted glasses. It's a tale of epic consequences, zoomed down to a microscopic look at just the few characters who matter and what they are going through. Its moment-to-moment action set pieces suck you in just as much as the eventual culminations of its individual plot threads, and the way it effortlessly juggles its themes of adolescence, self-loathing, loneliness, and dozens more is like nothing in the modern era. At the time of its inception, Evangelion was revolutionary. It took the core concepts of what a mecha series of its age typically was, a talented young man willingly thrusting himself into the pilot seat to take on the space Nazis with pride, confidence and enthusiasm, and turned that on its head. Evangelion, its characters and its themes are the total inverse of what the mecha shows of its time were about. Though the mecha genre has evolved since then, it was Evangelion that inspired this evolution. There's so much more that it does once you know where all its pieces lie. On top of how fresh it feels, it's well written too. Not flawless, there are some lines of dialogue that make you say to yourself, come on, you can write better than that, but it's still well written for the most part. Every exchange in every scene is used to convey characterization, and it always feels so complete that the threat of death, while unspoken, remains constant. Even fanservice is used to lend depth to its characters and how they view one another. Characterization is always at the forefront of Evangelion's priorities, and this is the vehicle with which it conveys its major themes. Among those, the way it handles sexuality is unlike anything you'd see today. Characters don't shy away from it reflexively. Girls aren't exactly throwing themselves at Shinji, but sexual tension is treated as an unavoidable form of torture for him. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the show's adults struggling with the sometimes toxic purpose that intercourse serves in their lives. It's a small part of Evangelion's gigantic picture, but one that I wholeheartedly appreciate for its nuance. That's another thing about this show, it's dense. Most anime nowadays, I feel myself wondering when the episode's going to be over, and I end up checking the timeline constantly. Nothing of the sort with Evangelion. Often I was surprised when the end of the episode rolled around, because you forget that there's an end to it. It totally engrosses you in the plight of its characters, the progress of its themes, and the unpackaging of its plot. What you'd usually dismiss as filler content is entertaining enough in its own right that it becomes fully integrated into the experience. Your time doesn't feel wasted on these episodes. In fact, they hold up as fantastic one-offs. It's just that good at picking up a random idea that would fit into any mecha show and just rolling with it, while sneaking a little character development under your nose to boot. And of course, when all the tension built around these characters comes to a head, it knows exactly where it wants to go with that. In fact, the last several episodes of this show are some of the most endlessly engaging I've ever seen, besides the last two. More on that later. Evangelion is a solid piece of simple, honest entertainment, right? But at the same time, there's a massive amount of content for artsy-fartsy types of folks like myself to tuck into as well. It's written as much as a piece of art as it is a mecha action romp, but I feel like that may be a critical flaw of Evangelion. Yeah, Anno's artistic vision is well realised and hits home for a hell of a lot of people, but a casual viewer might not comprehend the full picture. I know I don't. A casual viewing of this show will leave you with a lot of questions as to the purpose of certain lines of dialogue dialogue, some recurring motifs, and other distinct choices within the presentation. At least it isn't treating the audience like a bunch of idiots, but it's a type of storytelling that isn't for everyone. Thankfully it's not way up its own ass and makes sure everyone at least knows what's going on at all times. Characterization and development is crystal clear so long as you're not staring at your phone half the time. Now I know every one of you watching has at least heard of Evangelion before, and what you heard probably amounted to, "Oh yeah, it's so dark dude, it's real rough," which isn't wrong, but hearsay might give you the wrong idea about it. Despite its reputation, Evangelion isn't a gloomy, dark or miserable show all of the time. It knows how to be funny when it wants to be, and all these jokes manage to hit their mark. Some of its greatest moments too come from its solid, well-rounded performance as a fun-ass mecha action show. There is never a time when we are fully able to trust Nerve and the powers that be, setting an ominous tone that's always ready to rear its head and correct Evangelion's tonal balance should it become excessively upbeat. It's leading up to its famously dark ending, but the journey there isn't altogether miserable.
You did something very good and very noble today. You should be proud.
At its heart, Evangelion is about what its characters are going through and how they interact with one another. And as a character piece, it takes every opportunity to build upon its large, diverse cast. Even inconsequential side characters are treated like they're as much of a presence in the story as the main cast are. Sometimes Shinji, our main character, is completely removed from the story of an episode just to give someone else the focus they deserve. Which is just as well because Shinji is a controversial character among popular opinion. I mentioned this before, but his purpose is to be the inverse of a traditional mecha protagonist of the show's time, while also bridging the gap between the message the show wants to convey and the audience it wants to convey the message to. Instead of being this cheerful, confident kid who just can't wait to get in the robot and beat up the bad guys, Shinji is moody, anxious, and oftentimes would rather be anywhere else than in the cockpit of Eva Unit 1. He doesn't fight for justice or mankind, he fights because it gets him the attention he craves from his peers. This is what makes his character interesting to some and annoying to some as well. His struggle is one that will resonate with anyone with a troubled childhood, but his hesitation and disregard for urgency will definitely rub some viewers the wrong way. Though personally I felt it refreshing to see this kind of character filling the shoes of the protagonist. When Shinji begins to seek out praise from his father, Rei Ayanami, the first Evangelion pilot, gets in the way of this as Gendo's sole object of affection. She is a close-minded character with a distant, cold, and sometimes indifferent outlook on life. However, we see infrequent glimpses of personality shine through, and she is undoubtedly someone who shares Shinji's concerns about self-worth. The kudere has long been a pervading trope in Japanese media, but as one of the first popular examples, Rei's characterization is entirely tasteful, genuine, and the show really succeeds in conveying an interesting, nuanced character in her. She doesn't lack emotion at all, she simply doesn't know what they are. It's a small distinction that makes a big difference in the way the show portrays her. Now Rei included, the cast so far might sound pretty gloomy. It's a great thing when Asuka is introduced, a peppy Eva pilot from Germany who represents a breath of fresh air among a group of typically downtrodden characters. Her energetic, outspoken yet brash personality brings something new and fun to the mise-en-scène, but some viewers, like with Shinji, will be annoyed by her. Asuka integrates into the cast and develops just as well as any other character, yet she can be grating at times and some will outright dismiss her as a walking trope. It helps to just accept that her sometimes intolerable treatment of Shinji is an integral part of her ultimately fascinating character. She struggles with the same problems as Shinji while also bringing some unique emotional baggage to the boiling pot. So while she might irritate you time and time again, the show doesn't fail to shape her into a relatable addition to the cast at least.
I wonder, do you only pilot an Eva for the praise of others?
At the time, Evangelion looked better than anything else. Back in the day, it was common for an anime to be serialized across many episodes on the same kind of budget Evangelion had. It was among the first to limit the number of episodes to 26 from the outset in exchange for quality over quantity. As a result, the machines are extremely detailed, the fights are fluid and frenetic, and all the Sakuga holds up tremendously well. Evangelion looked fantastic for its time, and it's the reason why anime generally sticks to that kind of format even today. Unfortunately, the show's show's look has not aged well. A viewer who's used to the look of a modern top-of-the-range anime might take several episodes to get used to the show's vintage, hand-drawn style. It also started to run out of money towards the end, with the animation quality suffering as a result. Existing animation cells are reused again and again, cells are replaced wholesale with design sheets, existing backgrounds and character portraits are repurposed, and certain shots are embarrassingly prolonged. I'll be talking more about this later. Regardless of how well its aesthetic has held up over time, the show is still well directed. Hideaki Anno has this way of filling his shots with detail that add tons of depth to the world and the characters who inhabit it. Under his direction, a conversation between two characters can be lent the same sense of urgency and dramatic tension as the fight scenes. And my god, the action scenes. This is likely where most of the budget went. I'm not going to act like there's never been a cooler action sequence in an anime than what Evangelion has on offer, but if watching these giant robots and bomb-ass aliens just tearing into each other won't get you going, then I don't know what will. The angel designs are just so bizarre, you never know what they're going to do next, while the Evangelions are drawn in such intricate detail and move with such a satisfying sense of weight. Watching them clash is like a cherry on top of a delicately crafted cake. Anno certainly earned his reputation as a director with this show, making such good use of what little anime of the time had to work with, to the extent that his vision shines through to create a series of timelessly appealing sequences. The soundtrack is absolutely fantastic. Stellar. It is something about this show that has not aged at all. Its recurring tracks and reprisals are a delight to hear time and time again. They never fail to get you hyped up for the next battle, invested in the plight of its characters, or in awe of sheer visual spectacle. I cannot express my adoration for this soundtrack enough. Its composition and selection of instruments isn't anything special, but it's still unlike any soundtrack I've ever listened to. It's tense, it's scary, it's boisterous, it's triumphant, it's melancholy. It has a theatrical presence, but it doesn't hog the episode. You wouldn't think it was written for a budget 90s anime. I don't have much else to say about the soundtrack other than it's downright amazing and I love listening to it at any time of the day. But what's less than timeless about the show is the actors' performances and the overall quality of the dubbing. This is mostly a result of the era it was dubbed in which translating and releasing anime in the West was a risky venture, as it was still very much an underground cult interest. Many scenes where characters with wider vocal ranges like Misato and Asuka are speaking have a constant echo, something I'm not sure whether it was added in post or if it was an entirely technical problem. The voice direction isn't particularly strong either. I imagine it was a case of pushing the dub out of the door as fast as they can to minimise production expense, so sometimes lines are just off in a way that one more take could have fixed, because it certainly isn't the fault of the actors.
So, can I buy you a drink? Cup o' tea?
Gaji, I'm a boy.
Okay, sometimes they sound downright hilarious by mistake, but they're all a great fit for their roles, and when they get into the material they can deliver some knockout performances. I think they may not have watched the show beforehand and gotten engrossed over the course of the recording process because of that. The quality of their performances increases exponentially, and you can feel their passion coming through in their work later in the series. Okay, they're not always on point, but for the time and for what Evangelion was to the dub production staff, it's nowhere near bad.
Why did you have to call me now, Father?
Because I have a use for you.
So it's time I talk about episode 25 and 26 of Neon Genesis Evangelion real quick. The studio ran out of money. With no time to complete the story, they had to settle for second best and just reuse footage to get across some sense of closure on Shinji's behalf. But it simply wasn't enough. This is where End of Evangelion comes in. A theatrical retcon to those last two disappointing episodes of the original show. An opportunity for Anno to complete his vision and show it to a world that was now clamouring for it. And like the show it was spawned from, this film is one of a kind. Not only is it the culmination of dramatic build-up that the original TV ending failed to be, it's that and so much more. The beats of the conclusion to Shinji's character remain intact, but they're followed through in an entirely different, more engaging way. Every single other character is given the closure they deserve too, in a way that is completely natural even though it's the film's main goal. The aesthetic from the show remains intact, but the production values are higher than ever. Anno's artistic vision completely takes over in this movie, resulting in a first-time viewing experience akin to a fever dream. It's a barrage of disturbing, surreal, yet gorgeous imagery. If I were to sit here and try to pretend that I fully understood it, then I'd be a liar. The film is layered over and over again with sexual undertones. A deeply sexual movie, but tastefully so. It's also darker than anything else in the series. Some of the film's content was genuinely disturbing to me, and I'm not the kind of guy who usually gets disturbed watching a film or TV. The movie, and I guess Neon Genesis Evangelion by extension, is not for the faint of heart. Now I can see exactly why End of Evangelion in particular is such a locus of conversation. It's unforgettable. Not because it's well produced, but because it's so weird. I couldn't stop thinking about it for days after I first watched it. A flaw perhaps is that it sometimes becomes hard to focus on the actual film while you're still trying to make heads or tails of its abstract method of storytelling. Like the show, its greatest hindrance is its artsy fartsiness, and if you like that the way I do, then it's fine. But I can't see how a popcorn viewer would understand it at all. You have to watch it more than once to fully appreciate it, and the subtle details in the cinematography. Everything that was great about the original TV show is amplified here. As the grand finale of Evangelion's story, End of Evangelion is beyond astonishing in its presentation and the way in which it chooses to bring the series to a satisfactory conclusion. I just adore how odd this film is. Holy shit. 22 years down the line and Neon Genesis Evangelion is still amazing. Not only did it bring the anime industry back from the brink of death single-handedly, it established a format, an audience, and an emphasis on an individual creative direction that forged a path for the entire medium to follow. Besides the animation, which is perfectly excusable under the studio's circumstances, everything about Evangelion holds up tremendously well. The story is an utterly engaging work of art, carried along by a great cast of characters, a sublime soundtrack, and Anno's devotion to the story he wants to tell. If you haven't seen Evangelion yet and haven't been spoiled on it, then that's a miracle. I can't recommend this show enough to anyone who cares about the history of the medium, or anyone who cares about good television. Neon Genesis Evangelion is, or was, available on DVD in the UK from ADV, a company which no longer publishes Evangelion, or any anime at all. I'm not even sure if this company still exists actually, but if you can track down second-hand copies of the 8 individual volumes, yes 8, or the ridiculously pricey Perfect Edition, then it's the only way I know of seeing this series legally. End of Evangelion was licensed by Manga Entertainment back in the day, but it is also out of print. But at least not expensive to buy second-hand, just as with the original series, hard to find. If you loved Evangelion's bold, dramatic set pieces, then I'd recommend Attack on Titan, a bombastic spiritual successor with a heart and soul of its own, tackling themes of camaraderie, liberation, and sacrifice. Attack on Titan's reputation really does precede it. Or if you fancy yourself an anime historian, then check out Puella Magi Madoka Magica. Doing everything for the magical girl genre what Evangelion had for mechas, Madoka Magica's success in every area of its production and presentation spawned an entire subgenre, and for a very good reason. Hopefully one of these will be to your liking. If you liked what you see and want to see more, remember to subscribe or follow me on Twitter for the latest updates. Links are down in the description, and until next time, cheerio.